Students can reflect objectively, and the other frustration would be the time required for students to internalize and think about their work.
And then when they do something, when we give our feedback, they don't have enough time to practice on to apply the feedback that we give. I mean, like, apply once does not mean it's applied effectively. Like, we need to at least see a few more rounds.
The problems with AFL for me in teaching art, especially when it comes to teaching a class of 40 in low sec or even in upper sec for that matter, especially when you're teaching technical skills, students tend to want your attention immediately. They want feedback from you to ensure that they can move on to the next step. However, in a class of 40 and when you only have about an hour with them, it is not possible to go through each and every student with immediate feedback for them to move on. So that's the huge issue that I have with AFL in class when it comes to teaching art.
Time not enough, or not enough time. I think that's the biggest challenge or frustration that teachers have when we talk about assessment for learning, in particular formative assessment. As you know, art lesson is only 1 hour, and if you were to have this formative assessment, which is very, very good and important, it takes or occupies a bulk of the lesson already. And as much as possible, you want to give feedback to individual students to help them improve on their work. However, due to time constraint, we are not able to do so. So I think the biggest issue, biggest frustration we have is time.
In primary school setting, we emphasize a lot on the experiential and process learning. So as such, our challenge as primary school teachers is to always think of ways to capture their thought processes at every juncture of their learning.
Hello friends, do you share similar frustrations when it comes to assessment for learning in our curriculum? We do too. I'm Ira.
And I'm Nurul, and we have been working on some strategies to overcome some of these challenges.
We'd like to share with you about how solo taxonomy has helped us to alleviate 1. Onerous processes, to provide feedback, and 2. Nurture self-regulated learners. Our presentation will be scoped into 3 parts. Firstly, we shall look at the why and what is solo taxonomy. Thereafter, we'll be sharing with you how feedback has been facilitated through solo taxonomy in our sculpture, drawing, and painting lessons. And finally, we'll be sharing our reflections about solo taxonomy and how we'd like to move forward with it in our art curriculum. Like our colleagues, we also felt that time was our common enemy. Grading assignments, writing individual feedback, and carving time to bridge learning gaps are onerous processes and sometimes may not even be effective in moving students forward in their learning. This problem worsens when we teach a class of 40 students who have different learning needs and at different learning stages. We needed a handle to ensure that we could reach out to more students more effectively and efficiently. We wanted to ensure that they receive appropriate feedback about their work and progress and to reach their personal best. That was when we discovered solo taxonomy. Solo taxonomy has helped us to craft meaningful tasks, scaffold students' learning more accurately, and compose purposeful feedback with more precision, allowing students to embrace their tasks intrinsically. For students, it has helped to reduce performance anxiety as they are better able to apply feedback to improve their work, leading to greater self-regulation. SOLO stands for Structure of Observed Learning Outcomes. It categorizes learning into 3 broad stages of surface, deep, and conceptual learning. Through SOLO, students will have a more accurate self-assessment about their learning as they will be able to identify what they needed to progress through the 5 levels of outcomes. These 5 levels classify students' understanding and performance in terms of increasing complexity. The solo levels is usually written in student-friendly language so that students have clarity of where they are at and where they are headed towards. This, however, is not enough to ensure self-regulation. It is also not a once-off activity. It is a process of feeding up, feeding back, and feeding forward, as you will see how this was enacted in the next section of our presentation. So how does solo taxonomy works in a sculpture module? Our first experience with facilitating an art lesson through solo taxonomy was for a Secondary 1 ceramics class. Students were asked to create a clay gargoyle using the 4S technique. Before getting their hands dirty, students co-constructed and agreed on 2 success criteria. Firstly, joints must be secure, and secondly, edges and seams must be smooth. We deconstructed the learning intentions into smaller units of learning progressions and mapped it to the stages in the solo taxonomy with visual samplers to match the descriptors. We were also deliberate in starting the level descriptors with I can to ensure that students see the task as a personal learning endeavor and affirm their accomplishments as they progress up the stages of solo taxonomy. This template was distributed and unpacked before students engaged in their performance task. After the first week, students paused to take stock of where they are on the solo taxonomy through a checklist. What we found was that while most students indicated that they were at the multistructural levels, many are not yet competent of the last component in the 4S technique, which was the smooth. In many of the works, the joints were not smooth and secured. We had earlier assumed that the 4S technique was straightforward enough for students to emulate and master. So as to bridge this performance gap, we created another self-assessment checklist for the lesson in week 2. With another self-assessment checklist and a demonstration on how to smooth the joints in clay, we intervened the learning process to bridge an important performance gap. What is different about this checklist is that for each level, suggestions for improvements were made so that students were able to diagnose their own works against the visual samplers and make the necessary improvements to their sculptures. Students were also handed an OOPS form to reflect on and document the challenges that they faced during the course of the performance task. This form allows students to be open to exploration and embrace mistakes as opportunities to overcome the difficulties they encountered in their learning process. In summary, we had started the module with co-constructing the success criteria for this learning task with our students before we introduced them to the solo levels. Through formative assessment processes, we identified students' performance gaps and facilitated self-assessment through careful design of students' checklists. When performance gaps were bridged, students could refer back to the solo taxonomy stages to continue moving in their learning paths. Generally, students make significant improvements in their work because solo helped to provide clarity with regard to progressive achievement levels. Let's hear from Nurul now, how solo taxonomy might look like in drawing and painting modules. Over to you, Nurul.
I'm Nurul, and now I'll be sharing how we facilitated solo in a drawing module. The learning intention for this observational drawing module is to produce sensitive rendering of tonal values to define forms and texture and accurate proportions. As always, we want to ensure students know how to independently bridge their gaps to make progress. So the examples below were summary points shown along with the solo. These were strategies that we've gone through in class. You can use the same solo in more than one task. This example was the drawing diagnosis task. The green arrows indicate the progress students made in the second round of practice where solo was introduced. The red bar indicated that these students were at a pre-structural level, while the orange is for those at a unistructural. This is how we teachers tracked our students' progress. Though this does not show the entire class, majority of students were able to move up. In this example, students applied the same solo, but became more self-regulated through the following intervention. We noticed that there were common issues students faced and identified what was needed for many stuck at the uni and multi-structural levels. We asked students to identify their perceived issues and collect their help worksheet for an area they needed significant support in. These were how some of their help worksheets looked like. The examples were related to the task of a still life drawing of fruit and veg. This helped further break down steps for students to follow independently. And this is what solo looks like in a painting module. In this example, there are accompanying student samples, and it is a repository accumulated over each task. You might be wondering, why is the extended abstract level not a student sample? Most students are not at an extended abstract level when they begin, thus there can be no samples. But it's important for students at a relational level to understand that they can still challenge themselves to achieve more and not be complacent. Thus, we look for samples that are similar to the task and outcomes we are looking for. The information from the diagnosis helps us to plan differentiated tasks that provide the appropriate challenge to ensure students are able to achieve success. Students are informed of where they are at post-diagnosis, but subsequently learn how to identify where they are at on their own through the weekly exit tickets. Students develop routines for documenting their work in the progress log and then do their reflections for the session. By the third week or so, students do this automatically. The information gleaned from this quick checkout helps us to identify struggles students face. We can check whether they've accurately identified their solo levels for the progress they've made each week. Most importantly, the what do I need more support with gives us fodder to prepare for the next session, which in this round included a digital guide. Students access the guide on their devices to research ways to improve on their work based on their solo level. Students at a pre to multi-level might require more teacher guidance, thus we direct them to specific painting 101s they can focus on, while those at a relational and above focus on advanced painting techniques. The information gleaned from the exit tickets helped us decide what was necessary to include. These were labeled with "You Asked" in the guide. Here are our reflections on solo taxonomy and how we want to move forward. We are quite reassured that students find benefit in using the solo tax. Our assessments can sometimes be daunting for students when they perceive it to be purely subjective. It is heartening to see that in 3 Sec 2 classes surveyed, majority feel solo to benefit them in understanding the standards and expectations of their work better. The self-regulated learning cycle impacts metacognition, motivation, and behavior. We feel that the solo process impacts students' metacognition and increased self-awareness, but it does not necessarily affect their level of motivation or spur positive changes in their behavior. In fact, over here, we found that students' increased clarity in processes does not correlate to a belief or confidence in their ability to manage on their own. In our classes, students also do not demonstrate increased determination or perseverance. After all, teachers are very much at the center of this cycle, where we plan the task, set the goals, and share the strategies. Though I don't think it wrong to do so, we are definitely still on a journey towards helping our students achieve self-efficacy. So what can we do next? There are 3 areas we personally felt we could polish on: learning to unlearn, slowing down, and listening more. Sometimes what helped our students do well or score might not exactly be what they need. Why not challenge ourselves to think, does this help to prepare my students learn on their own? instead of, does this help my students score and produce great works of art? To do that, we've got to re-examine how we've been shaping the worlds our students learn in. And though the statements here may seem obvious, we sometimes miss or overlook the importance of these factors in shaping our students' motivation and behavior in the art classroom. Just carrying out solo itself made us realize there is a lot for our students to process, and too much too fast isn't healthy for anyone. The cycle of self-regulated learning takes time. Are we hoping for outcomes like the one on the right, or more like those on the left? Would our students increase engagement with their tasks by setting goals, researching, discussing possible strategies, testing them out, and reflecting, help them develop the motivation and behaviors of a true self-regulated learner? What would be something sustainable that can even be translated beyond the art classroom? Ultimately, even as we strive for outcomes, we should not ignore or disregard the immense benefits of celebrating the process. I went on to find out from my student who gave the feedback that secondary school is more focused on process. What did he think process was, and if he felt it made any impact? From this brief check-in with him, I can see the benefits and areas of improvement that we can consider in our future plans. For example, though the student felt that the process benefited him in being more independent and has now internalized what solo means, he felt the stress. It could be the constant self-reflections, but he did mention that if he had more time in class from 2 to 3 periods instead, he would not have felt the stress as much. I guess it was how much was going on in that short span of 2 periods. So understanding how important it is to slow down, we should also be listening and noticing what behaviors our students are exhibiting. In the following recordings, I intended to use the information to come up with a repository of strategies. It was my way of slowing down.
I'm rolling it. Like I'm using it as a bowling pin.
What are you doing to the camera?
Swirling it.
Is that what you're doing? It doesn't look like you're smoothing it. It's like it's already smooth.
Oh yeah, you see got all this thing.
Okay. It looks like you're trying to get it into a square. Yeah. Okay, so you can use a spoon to create a square.
But I noticed that with all the serious playing that they do, maybe students themselves could identify strategies and positive behaviors to increase confidence and motivation too. So it is very important to listen and notice. Listening helps us notice that the human beings in our classroom are unique and diverse. We want their education experience to help them be better versions of themselves. By listening to them a little bit more and giving them greater autonomy, we might actually be increasing their motivation and improving their behaviors. Asking questions like this can help guide our curriculum. We don't always have to stick to the way that things have been done, and exercising flexibility could even help us on the road towards self-directedness. At the end of the day, let's focus on our learners and try our best to see the world as they do.
We look forward to your comments and questions. Thank you and goodbye.